it is time for those of us from the private sector, those of us with real-world experience and real-world understandings, to step forward and do something about it. So what I would like to do is talk about, for a couple of minutes, about a couple of issues, and I could go into them in more depth in the Q&A. But the first thing that we have to focus on is our spending. Now, when we spend, and 40% of this is borrowed money that we're spending. And here's the thing about debt. Debt seems like something that's okay until all of a sudden it isn't, and it isn't at all. And that's what's happening in Europe. And with us adding 1% of our GDP a month to our national debt, that's what will happen in the United States if we don't get together and do something about it. Now, a lot of people talk about getting spending under control and addressing the deficit. And really, you have to start with the entitlements. You have to start with them. Anybody who says, let's start somewhere else, is just not telling you the truth. Because if we don't correct the entitlements, then it almost doesn't matter what else we do. We're still going to, sooner or later, hit the same fate as we're seeing in Europe right now. Now, there's 4 big entitlements. The first one is Obamacare. Now, I hope that the Supreme Court will take care of Obamacare for us. But if it doesn't, here's the reform plan for Obamacare. Repeal. There's a one-word policy for it. Let's talk next about Medicaid. Medicaid, Senator Lundberg was right. We need to send Medicaid back to the states. And it is because the needs of the states are different. What we have, the challenges our citizens face here is different than the challenges they face in Florida, Montana, and California. Heaven knows the problems they're facing in California. But sending it back to the states, it is time that states took care of their own business. That's what the founders envisioned, and that's the policies that we should follow throughout. When government must do something, it should be done at the lowest level that it can be done. Let's talk for just a second about Social Security and Medicare. And these are really the biggest ones. I mean, these between them have an actuarial deficit. And what's an actuarial deficit? That's the money you're going to have to pay, but you haven't yet admitted that you're going to have to pay. So our actuarial deficit in this is more than 5 times our country's gross domestic product. That means that every bit of value created by our whole nation for 5 years could be summed up by these 2 programs. Now, we need to reform them. It's real simple what happened here. When these started, these programs were designed to cover people for a short amount of time. When Social Security was created, a person turning 65 would expect to live to 67. So on average, someone would have a couple of years of benefits. Now, a man turning 65 would expect to live to 85, and a woman would expect to live to 87. So we have a much longer period that has to be covered by these programs without having any longer of a period of contribution over a person's lifetime. And that's the fundamental reason why these programs are so upside down. Now, there's a lot of ways of doing it. Paul Ryan, the very capable chairman of the Budget Committee, has put forward a plan. I think it's a serious approach to these matters. Simpson Bowles put forward another plan. What we have to do, we have to say, how can we resolve these problems? There are a lot of good approaches. Which one will get traction? Which one can be passed? Which one, that will depend on who's in the Congress and who's in the Senate and who's in the White House come next January. I think the Ryan plan is terrific in the way that we deal with premium supports and Medicare. I think the others of extending the retirement age for people my age, I'm only 48, but I should be able to plan longer for my retirement. Somebody who's 63 probably doesn't have time to plan for a much longer time for retirement. We need to keep those problems. We need to keep these programs solvent, but we have to do it without bankrupting our nation. I want to talk for a minute and switch gears from spending to something I think is really important in the economy. All of this depends on us having a robust economy. And one of the big things that's keeping our economy down is regulation. As I've gone around the district and I've talked to business owners, I've heard some horrific stories about regulation. From a guy who was required to buy a truck with a propane tank so large that he couldn't keep his business's cargo with it. I'm sorry?
Or lemonade stands, you have to get permits.
Or lemonade stands. Well, I haven't ratted out the place in my neighborhood, but I've heard that's a problem. To hotels having to put in ADA required lifts every 200 feet, which can cost them $150,000 if you have a big hotel, to replace something that isn't even used. So I'm hearing things, and these are businesses that are spending their time, spending their capital, spending things that could go to create jobs and create opportunities on complying with an ever-increasing flood of regulation. Who here thinks that's a problem? So I have proposed something called the EARN Act, the Ease America's Regulation Now Act, which is a reform for how we adopt regulations. It's got a few key components. One is that each new regulation will have an economic impact attached to it, and the proposing agency must couple that with a reform or repeal of another regulation with an equal or greater impact. Let's stop the growth of this regulation. Another piece is a sunset. Ronald Reagan said the closest thing to eternal life is a government agency. Well, those agencies correspond with these regulations. And one more piece I think is extraordinarily important, and that is for a major regulation, and the law defines that as one with 100 million of impact, should be ratified by the Congress. I'm fed up with Congress delegating what they should be doing, their legislative jobs, to unelected, unaccountable, hidden, faceless, nameless bureaucrats in Washington. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about the race. You know, I started by saying I'm the Republican who's going to fire Jared Polis, and I just want to share with you a couple other people who think so. I already introduced Jennifer. I want to tell you about a couple of endorsements. We've had a really exciting few weeks in endorsements. Former Lieutenant Governor Jane Norton endorsed me for this race last week. Along with Ryan Frazier, and I've been endorsed by Josh Henry, and people here in Boulder, from Eric Schmidt to former Mayor Bob Greenlee, who came real close to winning this election for this district in 1998, to State Budget Chair Sherry Giroux, Joint Budget Committee Chair. A lot of the great legislators and great leaders from around the state have signed on to beat Jared Polis. The NRCC, the National Republican Campaign Committee, has labeled me on the radar. Now it sounds like they're going to shoot me, but I think they're going to target me for help. That's part of the Young Guns program, and Young Guns was crucial in Cory Gardner's defeating Betsy Markey in the last election, so we are well on the way. I am the first candidate in this district since that program began to achieve that status. And last, some of my biggest fans apparently are in the Colorado Democratic Party, besides getting to be friends with Colin. The Democrats, as I told you when I was here a month or so ago, actually sued to keep me off the ballot. I guess we know who they want to run against, and it isn't me. Besides that, it's been an extraordinary race. We're showing real differences in vision. I'm a business-oriented, consistent, small government conservative vision, and I'd like to work with you to fire Jared Polis and fire Barack Obama this November. I'll take a couple of questions. Who has? Okay.
Mine really isn't a question, but a statement. When you were talking about the economy, that it's the economy that we want to go after, and you had 4 subjects. I was listening to something today, and it said that my numbers could be off, but imagine that we're spending, and I don't think you can imagine, we are $300 billion a month for the United States. Was it 300 billion?
$3 billion a
Oh,
day.
3 billion.
$3 billion a day. So it's about 1%.
So it is 300. So that's $3 billion a day times. What they were doing was they broke it down. They said, so $3 billion a day, and all that's coming into the government is 180. What 1.8 billion a day. So we're borrowing 1.4 billion a day.
Well, $3 billion is actually